Everything about the scene feels finished. Not peaceful, not quiet, finished. And in the middle of it, there is a man trying to understand how his life ended without him dying. This is where the story begins. Not at the blessing, not at the success, but at the collapse. Because everything this man had was taken in one day, not slowly, not over time, layer by layer, back to back, no space to breathe. First report comes, his oxen gone, his donkeys taken, servants killed. Before he can even process that, another voice cuts in. Fire falls, sheep destroyed, more servants gone. Then another, raiders, camels taken, more loss. And at this point, you are not even reacting anymore. You are just absorbing impact. But then the final message comes, and this one doesn't hit like the others. This one stops everything. Your sons, your daughters, all gone. One moment, one collapse, no survivors, and just like that, silence. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort you, it confronts you. Because now, there is nothing left to distract you from the reality of what just happened. Everything he built, gone. Everything he loved, gone. Everything that made life feel stable, removed. And you would think at that point, it's over. Nothing worse can happen. But the story doesn't stop there. Because now, it gets personal. Not around him, within him. His body begins to break. Pain everywhere. Not sharp and quick, slow and constant. The kind that stays, the kind that reminds you every second that something is wrong. So he sits down in ashes, with nothing left to hold on to except questions. No explanation, no reason given, just loss stacked on loss with no clear cause. Now pause here, because this is where most people rush. They want answers, they want meaning, they want to fix it quickly so it doesn't feel as heavy. But don't rush this. Stay here for a moment. Because this scene is doing something most people avoid. It is removing the illusion of control. We like to believe that life is predictable, that if we do things right, things will go right, that there is always a connection between our actions and our outcomes. But this moment breaks that completely. Because this man didn't make a mistake. He didn't live a reckless life. He did not ignore God. In fact, he did everything right. And still, everything fell apart. So now, you are left with something uncomfortable. If suffering is not always a result of wrongdoing, then what is it? Because if you can't trace it back to something you did, then you can't control it. And if you can't control it, then what are you standing on? That's the real tension in this story. Not just loss, but the collapse of certainty. Because now, it's not just about what he lost, it's about what he believed and whether that belief can survive this. Now, bring it closer, because this is not just his story. This is what it feels like when life stops making sense. When things don't go according to plan, when you did what you were supposed to do and it still didn't work, when something you prayed about still fell apart, and you are left there trying to reconcile what you believe about God with what you are experiencing in reality. That space right there, that confusion, that tension, that silence, that's where the story lives. So don't look at it as history, look at it like a mirror. Because at some point, everyone finds themselves here, not in ashes physically, but in a place where something has ended and you don't fully understand why. And in that moment, you are forced to ask a question most people avoid. Was my faith built on who God is or on what I thought He would do? That's where it begins, not with answers, but with a collapse that forces you to see what was really holding your life together. And once that question is on the table, you can't ignore it anymore, because everything that follows depends on how you answer it. 2. The hidden courtroom. Now, stay in the scene, but shift your perspective, because what Job is experiencing on the outside is not where the story actually started. Before the ashes, before the loss, before the first servant came running with bad news, something already happened, not on earth, in a place Job could not see. A conversation, a courtroom without walls. And in that moment, Job's name was mentioned, not because he failed, but because he stood out. God speaks first, not about Job's wealth, not about his success, but about his character. Blameless, upright, one who fears God. That was heaven's record. But then a voice responds, not to celebrate Job, but to challenge the reason behind him. That voice asks a question that changes everything. Does Job fear God for nothing? In other words, is his faith real, or is he just working for him? Now, feel the weight of that. Because this is not about Job losing things anymore. This is about why he believes at all. The accusation is simple. Take away what he has, and he will walk away from God. That's the case being built here. Not against Job's actions, but against his heart. And here's what makes this moment unsettling. God does not shut it down. He allows it, but with a boundary. A line is drawn. You can touch what he has, but not him. Which means everything that's about to happen is not random. It is permitted, controlled, measured. Even the chaos has limits. Now, come back to earth. Because Job doesn't hear any of these things. He doesn't know there's a conversation. He doesn't know there's a boundary. He doesn't know there's a reason beyond what he can see. All his experiences, his loss. So, from his perspective, this feels like life is falling apart. But from heaven's perspective, this is a test of something deeper. And this is where it gets personal. Because most people live their lives only seeing one side of reality. What's happening to them, what they can explain, what they can understand. But Job's story exposes something uncomfortable. There is more happening than you see. Decisions, permissions, boundaries, things being allowed, not because God lost control, but because something is being revealed. And if you don't understand that, you will misinterpret your entire life because you will assume if it hurts, God must be absent. If it is confusing, God must be distant. If it is falling apart, something must be wrong. But this moment breaks that logic because God was present before the suffering even started. God was speaking before Job lost anything. God was in control even when everything looked out of control. So now the question changes again. Not why is this happening, but what is being tested? Because the real issue here is not Job's possession, it is his foundation. Is his relationship with God built on outcomes or something deeper? Now, bring that back to you because you may not see a courtroom, you may not hear a conversation, but you have felt the tension. Moments where what used to work stops working. Moments where things are taken and no explanation comes with it. And in those moments, your faith is no longer theoretical, it becomes real. Because now, it's not about what you say you believe, it's about what remains when everything else is removed. That's the hidden courtroom, not a place you enter physically, but a reality your life can step into, where the question is not just, do you believe in God? But would you still believe if nothing was working in your favor? That's the tension Job is sitting in. Not just loss, but exposure. And the uncomfortable truth is this. You don't really know what your faith is built on until it is tested. So don't rush past this because what is being revealed here is not just Job's story. It is the unseen layer behind every moment that doesn't make sense. And once you see it, you can't go back to thinking everything is random because it's not. There is more happening than you can see. always. Next, we confront the biggest mistake people make when trying to explain it: the wrong interpretation. 3. Now, the scene shifts again, not in heaven, back on earth, because Job is no longer alone. People have arrived, not enemies, friends. The kind of people who sit with you when life falls apart. At first, they say nothing, they just sit there. 7 days, 7 nights, no advice, no explanation, just their presence. And honestly, that was the best thing they did, because the moment they opened their mouths, everything changed. They looked at Job, his condition, his losses, his pain, and they came to a conclusion, a confident one. This did not happen for no reason. Translation: you must have done something. Not maybe, not possibly, certainly. Because in their understanding of God, there was a system, clear, predictable. If you do right, things go well. If things go wrong, you did something wrong. It was simple and clean, comforting until it is applied to a real situation. Because now they are looking at a man who lost everything, and instead of questioning the system, they question him. Search yourself, be honest. God doesn't do this without cause. And slowly the weight shifts from grief to guilt. Now, Job is not just dealing with pain, he is being interpreted, labeled, reduced to a conclusion that doesn't match reality. And here's what makes it dangerous: they are not speaking from hatred, they genuinely believe they are right. That is what makes wrong interpretation so powerful. It feels like truth, it sounds like wisdom, but it completely misses what God already said. Because before any of this started, heaven had already given a verdict. Job was righteous, not perfect, but right with God. So now there is a conflict. Earth is saying one thing, he is suffering, so he must be guilty. But heaven already said something else. He is upright. So which one do you believe? Because this is not just their mistake, this is our mistake as well. We still think like this. We just say it differently. When something goes wrong, we start searching for causes. What did I do? Where did I miss it? Why is this happening to me? And sometimes that's valid, but not always. Because not every storm is a consequence. Some storms are contexts, spaces where something deeper is being revealed. But if you misunderstand that, you will start accusing yourself for things God never charged you with. And that changes how you see everything. Your relationship with God becomes strained, not because He moved, but because you think He is against you. You stop approaching Him freely and you start performing, trying to fix something that might not even be broken. That's exactly what's happening to Job right now. His friends are trying to force meaning onto his suffering, but the meaning they are offering is wrong. And instead of helping, they are adding weight to a man already carrying too much. Now pause, because this is where it gets real. Have you ever been in a situation where something went wrong, and the first thing you felt was, maybe this was my fault? Not because you had proof, but because that's how you have learned to think. Or maybe it wasn't even you. Maybe it was people around you. Subtle comments, questions that sound harmless but carry judgment. Are you sure you did not miss something? Maybe God is trying to teach you a lesson. And suddenly, your pain is no longer just pain, it becomes suspicion. And that's heavy, because now you are not just trying to survive what happened, you are trying to justify yourself in the middle of it. That's a trap. And Job refuses to fully accept it. Not arrogantly, not defensively, but honestly. He knows he did not do anything. He knows he did not create this. He knows something doesn't add up. And that tension between what he is experiencing and what he is being told, that's where the real struggle is. Because sometimes the hardest part of suffering is not the pain itself, it is the wrong explanation attached to it. So here's the truth you have to hold on to. Not everything that goes wrong in your life is evidence that something is wrong with you. Let that settle. Because once you remove that false weight, you can finally start asking the right question. Not what did I do to deserve this, but what is God revealing through this? That shift changes everything because now you are not defending yourself in a courtroom God never accused you in. You are positioning yourself to understand something deeper. And that's where Job is heading, not toward condemnation, but toward revelation. Next, everything begins to strip down to the core because when the noise fades away, only one question remains: who are you when everything else is gone? The breaking and the revelation. 4. Now, everything gets quiet again. The arguments slow down, the voices fade, because at some point explanations run out. And when they do, you are left with what is real, not theories, not opinions, just you and what remains. This is where Job is now. No more defending himself, no more trying to prove a point, just sitting in what's left of his life. And when you reach that point, something begins to happen, not around you, within you. Because suffering, when it goes deep enough, stops being about what you lost and starts revealing what you are standing on. Everything that can be shaken gets shaken. Your plans, your expectations, even your understanding of God. Things you were so sure about don't feel as certain anymore. And that's uncomfortable because we like clarity. We like knowing how things work. But this moment removes that and replaces it with something else: exposure. Not to destroy you, but to show you what was holding your life together. Because here's the truth most people don't realize: you don't really know what you are built on until it is tested. And Job is being tested at the deepest level, not his actions, not his discipline, his foundation. Was his faith built on what God gave him or on who God is? Because as long as life is working, you can't tell the difference. It all feels the same. But when everything is stripped away, the difference becomes clear. And this is where something powerful begins to emerge. Not immediately, not loudly, but quietly. Job doesn't curse God. He doesn't walk away. He questions. He struggles. He speaks honestly. But he stays. And that is significant because it reveals something that wasn't obvious before. His faith was not built on outcomes, it was deeper than that, even if he didn't fully understand it himself. And this is where the shift happens because what looked like destruction starts to reveal itself as something else: not loss, but separation. Things being removed, not because they were bad, but because they were never meant to carry the weight of your identity, your stability, your sense of control. All the things you thought were holding you together were actually temporary. And now that they are gone, you are forced to confront something real. Who are you without them? That's not an easy question because most people have never had to answer this. They've always had something to point to, something to define themselves by. But here, there's nothing left to point to. Just you and God, no distractions, no substitutes, no support systems to hide behind. And in that space, something deeper becomes possible. Not information, not quick answers, but encounter. Because when everything else is removed, you begin to see God differently. Not as the one who gives things, but as the one who is. And that changes everything. Because now your relationship is no longer built on transactions. If I do this, God will do that. It becomes something real, something that can exist even in silence, even in confusion, even in pain. And that is what is being formed in Job. Not comfort, not clarity, but depth. A kind of faith that doesn't collapse when life does. And maybe that is what is happening in your life. Not everything being taken, but everything being clarified. Things you depended on being exposed, not to leave you empty, but to bring you to something that doesn't move. Because once you find that, once your foundation shifts to something unshakable, everything else changes. Not your circumstances immediately, but you. And when you change at that level, you are no longer the same person who entered the storm. You have seen something deeper. You have felt something real, and that can't be taken away. So, what feels like breaking might actually be revealing. What feels like loss might actually be alignment. What feels like the end might actually be the beginning of something more real than what you had before. And once that begins, the story is no longer about what was taken, it's about what is being formed. And that leads us to the final piece, because eventually God speaks. And when He does, He doesn't give Job what he expected, He gives him something greater. 5. The answer God gave. And then, after all the silence, after all the questions, after all the arguments, God speaks. Not through a friend, not through a sign, directly, out of a storm. And if you are expecting comfort, if you are expecting a detailed explanation, this is where everything shifts. Because God does not answer Job the way we think He should. He doesn't explain the losses, He doesn't justify the pain, He doesn't reveal the hidden courtroom. Instead, He starts asking questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Can you command the morning? Do you understand how the world holds together? One question after another, not to confuse Job, but to confront his perspective. Because Job had been asking why, and God responds by revealing who. And that changes everything. Because sometimes the problem is not that God is silent, it is that we are asking the wrong question. We want explanation. God reveals identity. We want reasons. God reveals reality. And slowly, something begins to happen in Job, not around him, within him. The need for answers starts to fade away, not because the questions were invalid, but because he is encountering something greater than the answers themselves. He begins to see God, not just talk about him. And that moment, that shift, changes the entire story. Because now, Job sees something powerful. I have heard of you, but now I see you. That's it. That's the turning point. Not when he got his blessings back, not when things were restored, but when his understanding of God became real, personal, unshakable. And here's what you need to understand: God never told Job why, at least not in the way we expect. No breakdowns of events, no step by step explanation, just revelation, presence, perspective, and somehow that was enough. Now bring that into your life, because there are moments where you will want answers, clear ones, logical ones, things you can hold on to and say, now I understand. But sometimes that's not what God gives. Not because He's hiding something from you, but because He's trying to bring you into something deeper, an understanding that doesn't come from explanation, but from encounter. Because once you truly see God, not just know about Him, everything else starts to settle differently. The questions don't always disappear, but they lose their weight. Because now, your confidence is no longer in what you can explain, it is in who God is. And that is what holds you together. Not answers, not outcomes. Him. And this is the part most people miss about Job's story. They focus on the restoration, the double portion, the blessings coming back. But that's not the real ending. The real ending is that Job saw God differently. And once that happened, everything else became secondary. So, if you are in a place where things don't make sense, where you have been asking why and getting silence, maybe the goal is not explanation. Maybe the invitation is deeper than that. To know God beyond what you have heard, to see Him beyond what you expected. Because when that happens, you are no longer just surviving your situation, you are standing in something stronger than it. And if this shifted something in you, don't keep it to yourself, because someone else is sitting in their own version of that silence right now, trying to make sense of what they can't explain. And sometimes one perspective, one moment of clarity is enough to change how they see everything. So if this reached you, let it reach someone else. And remember this: God may not always explain what you are going through, but He will reveal Himself in it. And when He does, you will realize that that was the answer all along.